The UN is firmly determined to make abortion mandatory in all nations of the world under threat of economic sanctions. This is the broadest and most brutal uniformizing interference that any transnational power has ever dared to impose on nominally sovereign countries. This intrusion will pierce through legal and administrative shells and strike directly at the foundations of each society. It will be the complete eradication of the millennia-old moral and religious roots of entire cultures, and it goes without saying that, along with these foundations, their respective national identities will disappear. Appointed and paid by independent states, the international bureaucracy of the UN and the European community actively strives to destroy them and establish itself above them as a world government. The explicit decision to this effect has already been made since 1994. Humanity's problems can no longer be solved by national governments. What is needed is a world government. The best way to achieve it is by strengthening the United Nations Human Development Report. Until now, the imposition of this new power was camouflaged and subtle. Decisions within the purview of governments and parliaments were gradually transferred to transnational technical commissions, entirely shielded from any scrutiny by electorates. The political, legal, economic, and military sovereignty of nations was being sliced piece by piece, slowly, without the affected peoples receiving timely information to organize resistance. A genuine salami operation on a global scale. This is how the international bureaucracy managed to impose uniform programs in education, health, economy, etc., even on the strongest and proudest nations. The total devastation of American public education was the work of the UN, implemented with the complicity of Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush. The masterpiece of anesthetic Machiavellianism came when England, traditionally resistant to international promiscuity, consented to cede to the European Community Office in Brussels decision-making powers of the London government regarding budget, commerce, transportation, national defense, international relations, immigration, justice, and human rights, reducing Parliament to a local assembly subordinated to Brussels. A survey by The Sun showed that 84% of the English knew nothing about this. The decision on abortion marks what Mao Zedong would call a qualitative leap. A slow quantitative accumulation of homogeneous factors suddenly changes the nature of the process. Decades of stealthy manipulation have made nations sufficiently passive to bow, without the slightest question, to the ostentatious imposition of a new moral law, contrary to everything they believed for centuries or millennia. If there is one situation in which it makes sense to speak of cultural genocide, it is this one. And it goes without saying that new measures of the same kind will come in the coming years, sweeping from the map symbols, values, customs, and traditions that displease the self-appointed world government. The depth and breadth of the planned mutation go beyond anything the banal imagination of academic political scientists and economic analysts in the media can conceive today. On one side, the ideological substance of this revolution is drawn directly from the revolutionary materialism of the 18th century. It is about creating a global society totally administered and controlled by an elite of enlightened intellectuals, spokespersons for scientific reason against the obscurantism of religions and traditional cultures. But all this rationalism is only a shiny shell built to deceive the masses, including the intellectual proletariat of the universities. Inside, the entire Enlightenment was a dark amalgam of occultism, magic, Gnosticism, secret societies, rituals both comical and macabre. There is not a single serious historian who ignores this. Likewise, the enlightened secularism of the new global order is pure theater. Its sources are the same as the occultism of the New Age. Its gurus are Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Aleister Crowley, and others who came out of the same spiritual sewer. If in doubt, inform yourselves about a movement called the United Religions Initiative. I have already mentioned here the book by Lee Penn, False Dawn. The United Religions Initiative, Globalism and the Quest for a One-World Religion, Hillsdale, New York, Sophia Perennis, 2004. It's all there. I appeal to the reader to study this work while there is still time. Hundreds of pages of primary source documents leave no margin for doubt. The world government being formed before our eyes has a well-defined religious program to create a new bionic global spirituality that domesticates traditional religions and levels them down to any occultist, magical, ufology, or Satanist sect, where the essential goal of religious activity is not worship of God, but social reform. Of course, along the lines chosen by the bureaucracy. The Brazilian intellectual class is radically unqualified to discuss these mutations and their consequences for the country. The national fate is being decided by forces that no one in Congress, the media, universities, or the armed forces understands even superficially. Never have brains been so small for such great challenges. Discussions about these matters are mere contests of provincial literary pretension, while all around everything is swept into the maelstrom of a revolution that is not even understood by its own local agents. News from the real world. Anyone who wants to know what is going on in the country and the world should stop reading the big newspapers and start scouring the internet. 3 examples. First, I read on the website Alerta Brazil that, according to Leonardo Atuch, author of the book The CPI That Shook Brazil, Mino Carta received 2.5 million reais from the Mensaleo for his magazine Carta Capital, whose loyal and uncompromising petismo, support for the Workers' Party, is thus explained. The money came by direct order from Luiz Gushikin. Atuch reports that an extensive list of journalists, friends of the government, is about to be leaked at any moment. What will happen to these media Mensaleo beneficiaries? The same has happened to their 800 colleagues subsidized by CUT in 1993. Nothing. They will continue posing as impartial watchdogs of other people's morality. Second, on the site V-Crisis, you find everything about Venezuela, from lists of prisoners, dead, and disappeared to secret atomic collaboration agreements between Hugo Chavez and the North Korean government. In retaliation against this journalistic obsession, its editor, Alexander Boyd, a Venezuelan citizen self-exiled in England, is accused by Chavista agents of representing an Anglo-Venezuelan connection subsidized by the American government. They even threatened to request his extradition to the British government on allegations I cannot imagine at this moment. Boyd is my friend. He spent a few days here at my house, and I assure you he has nowhere to fall dead. If the American government subsidizes him, the damn check must be years overdue. Third, based on information I disclosed some time ago, the blog CACM94 demanded an explanation from Senator Heloisa Helena about the dangerous relations between her party and the Italian terrorist Achille Lalo, convicted by the justice system of his country for the murder of 2 children of his political enemy Mario Mattei, one of them 8 years old, both burned alive in a deliberate fire. With an 18-year prison sentence to serve in Italy, the terrorist lives in Brazil, under the protection of the government that Ms. Heloisa Helena pretends to oppose while continuing to collaborate with it in the São Paulo Forum. Lalo is a co-founder of PSOL and publishes Marxist theory articles in the Senator's Party newspaper. Gabriel Castro, editor of the blog, rightly thought that a presidential candidate could not walk hand in hand with such a dirty partner without at least giving some explanation to public opinion. Faced with the question, the senator's office, which had previously agreed to the interview, reacted with 4 stones in hand, putting on a pose of offended dignity and spreading all sorts of perverse insinuations to avoid answering. The newspaper then warned it would publish the questions without answers, and the senator herself did not miss the chance to play the victim, one of the most common evasive techniques in leftist circles. Threat? Do you think I'm afraid of anything? I spent my life as a survivor having to swallow my own fears, understood. Touching performance, Senator. But, once the show was over, where is the explanation? Nothing. Total silence. The blog then published proof of Lalo's participation in PSOL, accompanied by a terrifying document. A photo of one of the fire victims, burned but still alive, vainly trying to escape through the window of the burning house. What I found most beautiful in the office's reaction was the insolent question sent to Gabriel Castro. Does your audience know who Olavo de Carvalho is? That makes it difficult for us to do anything. What do your assistants mean by this, Senator? That you know me? That you know something terribly compromising about me that the blog editor ignores? Then say it, madam. Actually, you won't say anything, neither against me nor in your favor. You won't say anything because you have nothing to say. You are already stained by the partnership with this monstrous assassin, stained yourself further by fleeing the question, and by defending yourself behind defamatory allusions to a third party, You completed the mess. The brave Gabriel Castro closes the account of the episode with an unavoidable conclusion. When an interviewee flees and does not answer a question, unintentionally he says much more than if he had answered. Complete defeat. The soldiers of the army returning to their barracks, under a hail of spit from the media, after a frustrated raid in the hills of Rio de Janeiro, are the image of the seemingly irreparable downfall of our armed forces. Since the time they chose to respond to successive waves of slander with timid official notes instead of the legally and morally obligatory lawsuits, the commanders of the three branches have shown their willingness to sacrifice the dignity of their corps on the altar of a Gramscian simulation of democracy and order. Then they moved from omission to explicit masochism, awarding honors to the detractors of the armed forces, showing undue reverence to a government complicit with the FARC, and gladly submitting to orders to turn soldiers into diggers at the service of the MST. Denying, against all evidence, the military and strategic reach of drug trafficking on the continent, they let the enemy grow with impunity, while boasting that they would not stoop to police functions. Avoiding the greater fight, the fight to save the country from the continental plot woven by the macabre alliance of communists and traffickers, now all they have left is to try to show some service by chasing petty criminals and proving they are no longer even capable of that. But if our troops have the capacity to suppress crime in Haiti, why do they perform so poorly in Rio de Janeiro? It's simple. In Haiti, there was no hostile media, no NGOs and politicians suspicious of everything, no pressure from an elite full of hatred and spite for the military class. Shots and bombs don't scare the Brazilian soldier. What frightens him is the perverse gaze of the beautiful people, the diffuse malice of false moralists, the perfidious tongue of the universe's biggest gossipers. It is to these that our armed forces, so valiant in other respects, have ceded everything. Slandered, degraded, ridiculed, sabotaged by every imaginable means, they failed to react effectively while there was still time, and now they must hastily invent some uplifting pretext to justify their transformation into an auxiliary troop of the São Paulo Forum. How long before this happens? After our soldiers were subjected to the humiliating task of setting up stands for the World Social Forum, there is really very little time left. None of this would have happened if at least part of the high command had not been induced by pseudo-intellectuals, both uniformed and civilian, to believe that, with the fall of the USSR, the ideological struggle was a thing of the past, and from then on the East-West conflict had given way to North-South competition or rich countries against poor countries. Swallowing this infamous stupidity, they did not realize, or pretended not to realize, that they were becoming at least passive instruments of the international communist strategy at the very moment they proclaimed the death of communism. I know well that the overwhelming majority of the military want none of this. I have written, and I repeat, that only among the armed men in Brazil did I find genuine patriotism, a deep feeling of the country's historical continuity as a legacy of heroism and sacrifices. I know they remain faithful to their first love. But what could be more disturbing than a conflict of loyalties? To be a Brazilian soldier today is to have your heart torn between formal obedience to a regulation and attachment to the values that originated it. Normally, laws express values. But when these are subverted beneath the legal shell while it remains intact, then a struggle between form and content is established, creating and exploiting this antagonism, leading the country to confusion, exhaustion, despair, and finally surrender. This is the work of the Gramscian cultural revolution. It has no preference for the soldier's uniform, the magistrate's robe, the executive's suit, or the worker's overalls. It divides and weakens all souls. Over the defeat of all, only the party grows stronger. And when I say party, I am not referring to the PT, Workers' Party, but to the complex of well-articulated left-wing parties, behind their superficial divergences, in the continental strategy of subversion and theft. If Mr. Luiz Inácio da Silva abandoned the São Paulo Forum to assume the presidency of the country, this is merely an administrative formality with no political significance. After this individual confessed to making strategic decisions in secret meetings with foreign dictators, without informing Congress or the population. Only mentalities too cowardly to admit reality can continue denying that Brazil is governed from the São Paulo Forum. that Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro command here more than any minister or military commander. The country knows it is on all fours, but continues pretending that its humiliation is a reason for pride. Clearly, there is some confusion between national pride and gay pride. Is there still time to save the dignity of the armed forces? Yes, but it is running out fast. If you want a formula, lesson number 1 is simple. The military must stop caressing the enemies who flatter them with sweet words and learn to listen to the friends who displease them with harsh truths. Truth is good in itself. There is no reason to try to be pleasant. Those who prefer pleasantness to sincerity are already too weak to admit the seriousness of their own situation. Men of value do not ask for pleasantness. They ask for the knowledge necessary to make manly decisions. If that is what you want, count on me. If you want sweet talk, go ask your false, self-interested friends.